Picture this. You're walking through the streets of ancient Rome in the year 958 AD. The streets of Rome are choked with dust, incense, and the slow murmur of prayers echoing from marble chapels. The once mighty Roman Empire is but a faded shadow, fragmented into kingdoms vying for spiritual and temporal power. Amid this fractured empire, you find yourself walking through the heart of Christendom, the Vatican. And then, you witness something that makes your blood run cold. A figure emerges, naked, arrogant, swaying with intoxication. It is none other than Pope John XII, entirely unclothed, striding brazenly through the hallowed halls of the Vatican. He is not alone. Around him gather his bishops, not in prayer or penitence, but in revelry, partaking in an orgy that seems almost ritualistic in its corruption. The women are young, beautiful, and many of them enslaved, brought from distant corners of the old empire, Greece, Syria, Libya, and from other parts of the known world. The robe of holiness, the sacred vestment that for centuries symbolized divine authority, lies trampled beneath drunken feet. As wine spills over marble floors and the air fills with laughter, the Pope raises a toast, not to Christ, but to the old pagan gods, long since denounced by the Church, Dionysus, Bacchus, perhaps even Jupiter. It is unclear whether the Pope is mocking the faith, abandoning it, or performing some twisted synthesis of Christianity and the ancient cults he never truly left behind. But before diving into these forgotten stories of debauchery and corruption, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And now let's start with the Pope who turned the Vatican into a brothel. John XII, born Octavianus, inherited the papacy in the year 955, thanks to the influence of his powerful father, Alberic II of Spoleto, who essentially installed his own son as pope while on his deathbed. But what followed was not a legacy of sacred devotion. It was a descent into scandal, violence, and unrestrained vice. John XII didn't see the papacy as a divine calling. He treated it as a toy. Roman historians from the time accused him of turning the Lateran Palace into a brothel. Prostitutes were welcomed in holy chambers. Sacred relics were pawned off to fund his pleasures. And rather than preaching the Gospels, he was said to toast to pagan gods during drunken feasts and gamble with his bishops. And it wasn't just moral collapse. It was political chaos too. He angered many of his allies, especially the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I. Their alliance crumbled after John XII secretly negotiated with Otto's enemies. In response, Otto marched on Rome and forced a synod to investigate the Pope. The accusations brought forward by bishops were staggering: simony, murder, incest, and invoking demons. He was deposed, but not for long. John XII returned to power with the help of Roman mobs and immediately took revenge. He mutilated his enemies, executed bishops who dared oppose him, and resumed his debauchery. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, his reign ended in 964. The young pope died under mysterious and fittingly scandalous circumstances. One account claims he died after being struck by a jealous husband who caught him in bed with his wife. Another simply says he suffered a stroke while committing adultery. Whatever the truth, Pope John XII's short life was one of recklessness, lust, and betrayal. He didn't just stain the papacy, he defiled it. In the long shadow of church history, few names echo with as much disgrace. Pope Benedict IX. If John XII was the most depraved teenager to ever become pope, then Benedict IX was the most bizarre and arguably the most corrupt. He became pope not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. Born Theophylactus of Tusculum, Benedict IX first took the papal throne in the year 1032. He was likely no older than 20, placed there by his powerful and aristocratic family. But this was no boy of virtue. Chroniclers called his reign a disgrace, accusing him of rape, adultery, and even black magic. He was known to host wild orgies inside Vatican grounds and was so hated that even the Roman people, used to political corruption, demanded his removal. But Benedict wasn't interested in reform. He was interested in pleasure. His first papacy ended when he was driven out by a rebellion, but he returned shortly after, then left again, then returned again. In a move that stunned even the most cynical observers of the time, Benedict IX decided to do something that would forever stain the reputation of the church. He sold the papacy. Yes, literally for gold. He approached his godfather, the archpriest John Gratian, and offered him the papal seat for a price. Gratian, later known as Pope Gregory VI, accepted, though reportedly to bring peace to Rome. Still, the act was so scandalous that it set off a domino effect, plunging the church into a legitimacy crisis. Benedict wasn't done. After selling the title, he changed his mind and tried to reclaim it twice. The church now had 3 men claiming to be pope at the same time. The situation grew so chaotic that Emperor Henry III had to step in, calling a council to resolve the mess. The result? All 3 were removed. A clean slate. Benedict IX was excommunicated not once, not twice, but multiple times over the years, depending on which faction held control. He's remembered not just as one of the worst popes, but as one of the most bizarre, greedy, and shameless. The man who treated the throne of St. Peter like a game of musical chairs. A pope for sale. A soul auctioned. And Rome would never forget it. Pope Alexander VI, the House of Borgia's crowned serpent. If there's one name that dominates every conversation about corruption in the Catholic Church, it's Borgia. Rodrigo Borgia, crowned as Pope Alexander VI in 1492, didn't just bring scandal to the papacy, he defined it. From the moment he assumed power, his reign was steeped in nepotism, bribery, and personal ambition. Alexander didn't rise through spiritual merit. He bought his way into the highest office in Christendom. The conclave that elected him was notorious for backroom deals and lavish bribes. And once he was enthroned, he wasted no time securing positions of wealth and power for his family. His papacy wasn't about shepherding souls. It was about expanding the Borgia dynasty. He openly acknowledged multiple children, including Cesare and Lucrezia, figures whose own reputations are soaked in legend, intrigue, and rumor. Cesare, a cardinal turned warrior, acted more like a mafia don than a church leader. Lucrezia was accused, perhaps unfairly, of incest, poisonings, and manipulating powerful men. But Alexander himself was no cleaner. He held lavish orgies inside the Vatican. One of the most infamous was the Banquet of Chestnuts, where 24 prostitutes were invited to entertain guests while the Pope allegedly watched from his throne. Dancers performed naked. Coins were tossed to see who could catch them with anything but their hands. Meanwhile, Alexander sold cardinalships to the highest bidder, regardless of merit. The church became a market, and faith became a currency. Yet, strangely, he was also a skilled administrator. He strengthened the papal states, reformed certain bureaucracies, and even commissioned art. But none of that could wash away the filth that surrounded him. He died in 1503 under suspicious circumstances, some say poisoned by mistake while plotting to kill a rival. Even in death, the Borgia name lingered like incense clinging to a ruined chapel. He was buried with little ceremony, his body so bloated from decay that it reportedly wouldn't fit into his coffin. To this day, Pope Alexander VI is remembered as the most scandalous pope in history. He didn't just defile the sanctity of the church, he weaponized it. Under his rule, the Vatican became a throne room of ambition, lust, and whispered deaths. Pope Urban VI, the tyrant in white. While many corrupt popes masked their sins with charm or indulgence, Pope Urban VI made no such effort. His reign, beginning in 1378, was marked not by quiet scandal but by open hostility, paranoia, and terrifying violence. Urban VI was elected during a time of tension. The cardinals, fearing Roman mobs, chose an Italian, Bartolomeo Prignano, hoping to calm the locals, but they soon regretted their decision. Urban turned out to be volatile, suspicious, and cruel. He rejected advice, berated his cardinals in public, and reportedly beat his staff for minor errors. He didn't just rule with an iron fist. He ruled with clenched teeth and a red face. His paranoia grew rapidly. He believed that his own cardinals were plotting against him, and instead of addressing their concerns, he responded with violence. When several cardinals conspired to oppose him, or perhaps just escape his wrath, he had them imprisoned, then tortured. Some were brutally beaten, others slowly starved. 5 of them were executed without trial. Urban's instability led many to conclude that his election was invalid. A group of cardinals fled and elected a rival pope, Clement VII, based in Avignon. The result was one of the most damaging crises in church history, the Western Schism. For nearly 40 years, Europe was divided between two, and sometimes even three, competing popes. Different kingdoms backed different pontiffs, and beneath the surface, the unity of Christendom slowly fractured. Urban VI did not reconcile. He excommunicated his rivals and ruled with increasing isolation, surrounding himself with sycophants and brutes. As his mental health declined, so did the integrity of his reign. He alienated allies, destabilized Rome, and left the papacy stained with cruelty. He died in 1389, alone, bitter, and reviled. Pope Urban VI's reign is often overshadowed by the schism that followed. But his own actions, his rage, his violence, and his thirst for domination were the spark that set the church ablaze. He wasn't just a bad pope, he was a tyrant cloaked in holiness. And his shadow still lingers in the pages of papal history. Pope Stephen VI, the cadaver trial. Some papal scandals stained the church with greed, others with lust. But what Pope Stephen VI did was so macabre, so surreal, it bordered on the theatrical. It's remembered today as the Cadaver Synod, a trial unlike any other in history. The year was 897. Rome was in chaos, torn between rival factions. And Stephen VI, a pope placed in power by the powerful Spoletan family, wanted revenge on his predecessor, Pope Formosus. But there was one problem. Formosus was already dead. So Stephen had his decomposing corpse dug up from its tomb, dressed in full papal regalia, and dragged into the Lateran Basilica to stand trial. Yes, a dead pope, seated on a throne, propped up by attendants, was placed on trial for alleged crimes. The charges? Perjury, violating canon law, and unlawfully ascending to the papacy. A deacon was assigned to speak on behalf of the corpse, answering Stephen's shouted accusations while the audience looked on, horrified. As the trial unfolded, the body slumped and swayed. Eventually, Pope Stephen VI declared Formosus guilty. The sentence? The corpse was stripped of its vestments. The papal fingers used for blessings were severed, and the body was thrown into the Tiber River. It was a grotesque spectacle, but also a deeply political move. By condemning Formosus, Stephen invalidated all the bishops and clergy he had ordained, clearing a path for his own supporters to rise. But the horror did not bring peace. The public was outraged. The cadaver triggered riots across Rome. Months later, Stephen was imprisoned. His enemies stormed his cell and strangled him to death. In the aftermath, the church tried to bury the episode, both literally and figuratively. Formosus's body was recovered and reinterred with honor. Future popes nullified the Cadaver Synod's rulings and forbade such trials from ever happening again. But the damage was done. Pope Stephen VI's legacy is not one of leadership, doctrine, or devotion. It is the image of a corpse on trial, a moment that turned the Vatican into a theater of the absurd. Even in death, the papacy was not safe from the wrath of politics. Pope Leo X, the prince who bankrupted salvation. When Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X in 1513, he wasn't stepping into a spiritual office. He was ascending a throne. Born into one of the richest families in Florence, Leo was a Renaissance prince long before he wore the papal tiara. And when he did, the Vatican became his playground. He once said, "God has given us the papacy. Let us enjoy it." And he did. Extravagantly. Under Pope Leo X, the papal court ballooned into a theater of luxury. Gold dripped from ceilings. Feasts never ended. And artists like Raphael filled the Vatican with beauty. He was a lover of poetry, pageantry, and performance. But beneath the surface of high culture lay financial ruin and spiritual disaster. Leo drained church coffers to fund his Renaissance ambitions. And when he ran out of money, he found a new way to raise funds: by selling salvation. He authorized the sale of indulgences, certificates that, for a price, promised to reduce punishment for sins. Priests across Europe stood in churchyards proclaiming, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." It worked. Gold flowed into Rome, but outrage flowed faster. In 1517, a monk in Germany had enough. His name was Martin Luther, and he nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, a direct protest against indulgences and papal corruption. How did Leo X respond? Not with humility or reform. He laughed it off, called Luther a drunken German who would change his mind when sober. When Luther didn't, Leo excommunicated him. It was a fatal miscalculation. The Reformation exploded. Churches broke away. The unity of Western Christendom shattered forever. To Leo, the church was a stage, and he was the star, but he couldn't see the cracks forming beneath his feet. He died in 1521, heavily in debt, unaware of the full fire he had lit. Pope Leo X is remembered less for the beauty he commissioned, and more for the schism he helped cause, not through heresy or war, but through pride, excess, and the commodification of grace. A prince of the Medici, a performer on a sacred stage, and a pope who lost the soul of Europe. Pope Sergius III, the father of the pornocracy. Long before the age of Borgia decadence or Renaissance indulgence, there was a pope who set a precedent for corruption that would echo through centuries. His name was Sergius III, and his reign in the early 10th century marked the beginning of what historians now call the pornocracy. Yes, the rule of harlots. Sergius III became pope in 904 after a bloody struggle in which his rivals were assassinated. It was an era where the papacy wasn't a divine office. It was a prize in a brutal Roman power game. And Sergius, ambitious and ruthless, was willing to kill for it. But it was his relationship with a noblewoman named Marozia that truly defined his papacy. Marozia belonged to the powerful Theophylact family, which essentially controlled Rome during this period. According to chroniclers, Sergius took her as his mistress while she was still a teenager. Their affair produced a child who would later ascend the papal throne himself as Pope John XI. Yes, you heard that correctly. A pope fathered another pope. The Roman clergy whispered. The public grumbled, but none dared challenge him. Sergius ruled with an iron hand, restoring the memory of Pope Formosus, the same corpse tried in the infamous Cadaver Synod, only to have him recondemned, then buried again without honor. It was political vengeance disguised as papal authority. He filled the Curia with his supporters, sold church offices, and presided over what was arguably the most morally bankrupt period in papal history. While the Vatican should have been a beacon of spiritual leadership, it became a den of incestuous alliances and backdoor deals. The holiest office in Christendom had become a family business for Rome's elite. Under Sergius, the foundations of papal dignity cracked. He died in 911, still in power, still feared, but never revered. Pope Sergius III isn't as well known as the Borgias or the Medici popes, but his reign marked the beginning of nearly 60 years where the papacy was controlled by one Roman family through seduction, manipulation, and bloodline. He was the father of the pornocracy, a pope not just corrupted by power but entwined in a legacy of lust and hereditary sin. Pope Boniface VIII, the pope who declared himself God on earth. When Pope Boniface VIII rose to power in 1294, he inherited a papacy in crisis. His predecessor had resigned, a rare and humble act. Boniface, however, was the opposite of humble. He saw the papal throne not as a burden of service but as a throne of domination. He famously declared, "I am Caesar, I am emperor," but it was his bull Unum Sanctum that truly captured the scale of his ego. In it, Boniface claimed that submission to the Pope was absolutely necessary for salvation. He placed himself above kings, above emperors, above everyone. He believed that not only did he rule the Church, but all of Christendom, and he meant it. Boniface tried to exert control over European monarchs, especially Philip IV of France. But Philip wasn't just any king. He was shrewd, ruthless, and deeply resentful of papal overreach. When Boniface issued edicts interfering with French taxation of clergy, Philip responded with accusations, heresy, immorality, and even witchcraft. What followed was unprecedented. In 1303, a group of armed men, led by a French ally, stormed the papal residence in Anagni. They slapped the Pope across the face, a literal blow to papal authority. For 3 days, Boniface was held prisoner, humiliated by the very monarch he had tried to dominate. Though he was eventually freed, the damage was done. Boniface VIII died shortly after, either from illness or, as some say, rage and humiliation. But his downfall didn't stop there. Years later, his body was exhumed by enemies who claimed it reeked of sulfur, a symbolic gesture accusing him of damnation. And when Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, he placed Boniface in the 8th circle of hell, the place reserved for corrupt churchmen. Pope Boniface VIII is remembered as the man who pushed papal arrogance to its breaking point. He saw himself as the ultimate ruler, but in trying to become a god among men, he nearly destroyed the respect for the papacy altogether. His story is a cautionary tale. When sacred power is wielded without humility, it becomes tyranny cloaked in divinity. Pope Innocent III, the crusader of blood and fire. Don't be fooled by the name. Pope Innocent III was anything but innocent. Crowned in 1198, he was one of the most powerful popes in history and one of the most dangerous. Unlike other corrupt pontiffs who indulged in personal pleasures, Innocent pursued power on a global scale. His weapon wasn't gold or women, it was holy war. Under his rule, the papacy became an empire of swords. Innocent III launched the Fourth Crusade, a military campaign supposedly meant to retake the Holy Land. But it never even reached Jerusalem. Instead, in a shocking twist, the Crusaders turned on Constantinople, the Christian capital of the Byzantine Empire. In 1204, they sacked the city, looted churches, raped nuns, and stole relics in the name of God. This wasn't just a military disaster, it was a spiritual betrayal. Innocent claimed he was outraged, but by the time his condemnation reached the Crusaders, they had already declared victory and sent him spoils of war. But perhaps even darker was the Albigensian Crusade, a war he declared not in the Middle East but within Europe itself. In southern France, the Cathars, a Christian sect labeled heretical, were spreading ideas that threatened the church's authority. Instead of sending theologians, Innocent sent knights. His message? Kill them all. God will sort them out. In 1209, the city of Béziers was attacked. When soldiers asked how to tell heretics from faithful Catholics, the response was chilling: kill them all. Over 20,000 people were slaughtered, men, women, and children. Under Innocent III, the church declared war on its own people. Heresy was punished with extermination, and the seeds of the Inquisition were quietly planted during his reign. He died in 1216, satisfied with his campaigns and reforms. And while he did centralize church power and reshape canon law, his legacy is stained with the blood of those he labeled enemies, even if they wore the cross. Pope Innocent III didn't just rule the church, he weaponized it, and his crusades, launched under banners of purity and salvation, remain among the darkest blots on Christian history.